Welcome to the Fourthstream podcast, where we are dedicated to finding hope. You can count on us to do our research and invite you into a dynamic learning process of authenticity. You can find lots of hopeful resources at fourthstream.com.
Welcome. Today we're going to talk about the subject of the kingdom. I wrote a book on this a while ago, so I'll be referring to that a little bit. But the big deal with talking about the kingdom, to me, relates to finding your true self. Because in the world that we live in, there are just so many illusions of what is true and what is real. And so God has given us a way to be able to find our connection. And I'll start out with this thought, and maybe it'll be helpful to you like it has been for me. There's an internal me and there's an external me. So there's the things that are going on the inside of me, and then the things that people can see on the outside. And life shapes both the internal me and the external me. So when I talk about finding your true self, I'm talking about it in the context of both the internal and the external part of who you are and who I am. Right along with that, I'm made in the image of God. Now, this image is distorted because of what happened in the Garden of Eden, etc. But my potential remains intact, even though the image has been distorted. And right along with that, my potential may be unlocked. And that's what I'm talking about when I'm discussing finding your true self, is that I've been made in God's image, it's been distorted, my potential remains intact, and my potential may be unlocked, particularly by the work of God in my life. So when I wrote Curious Journey, I've written several books, I get them all mixed up. When I wrote about the kingdom, finding your true self, there was a direction that I was heading, and I'd like to kind of talk about true success for a second, just to set up the overall concept of this. First of all, I define a satisfied mind as living and finishing my days, however long they may be, at peace with my Creator and at rest concerning my life and the afterlife. That to me is true success. So within that, I have outlined some challenges that I'm addressing, and I don't want this to be like a self-help kind of a approach, but it's more like what are the things that are going to help me find my true self. First one, success challenge number one, engage honest conversation with yourself. It's really important to be honest and transparent with yourself, because if you can't be transparent with yourself, where does that leave you? Success challenge number two, find a source that you can trust to self-mentor. That's why we've been talking about some of the things that we have related to the God story and the woven story, because I feel like I found a source to be mentored and self-mentored with. The third success challenge is inviting the spiritual process of interacting personally with Jesus' teaching about his kingship and his kingdom, which is what we're going to talk about. And the fourth one, find other men and women who are courageous and willing to ask penetrating questions. So in that context of finding our true selves, it's through our connection with Jesus' kingship that we find our connection to our Creator. This is what the God story tells us. This is what we're investigating in this particular session together. Jesus is not merely the founder of a 2,000-year-old religion. He is a creator of the world. The Bible is really clear about this in the woven story. And so when we're looking to understand true success, it's important to see that in this backdrop if we're going to investigate it properly. We talked about this a little bit early on in some of our conversations, but nowhere in the God story is there defined an Old and a New Testament. That just doesn't exist in the story. There's one woven testament. Jesus used the word church, I think, 3 times. The kingdom is used dozens of times, all the way through, particularly in Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, but all the way through all 4 Gospels. And as I think about that whole idea of the the woven story, I think about what is it that I want. I found this question to be a real starting point on the journey to a satisfied mind. What do you value? Monetary success? personal security, being respected, to be a good father or mother, to experience a happy marriage, to have good friends, or to be a good friend. As our life unfolds, we begin to develop what many would call our worldview. This is impacted by our upbringing, our relational experiences, and our successes and our failures. Each of us is intrinsically has a picture of who we are and where we are going inside of us. Depending upon the person, this worldview is given some level of attention and reflects our perceptions of who we are, where we're going, and what brings meaning to our experience. Now, there are some pretty lofty and beautiful things that have been presented to us by the living God in the God story, especially related to a life that counts. Together, we will search the Gospel of Matthew and attempt to internalize some of the things that we observe about our King and his kingship. So, here we go. Jesus and his kingdom are the key to finding our true identity. We were created in the image of God, as I mentioned before, and so our identity is wrapped up in that. And you got to remember that God is so awesomely great and vast that he is able to create unique identities in every human who's ever lived and be connected with that identity. So in this context of finding your true self, I like to say it this way, it seems succinct to me: king first, then kingdom, then church. King first, then kingdom, then church. It's this simple and it's this complex. So as I go through the book of Matthew, taking a look at kingdom clarity, there are a couple things to note, and this kind of comes out of Matthew chapter 10 if you're looking through the book. What is clarity about the kingdom? Well, Jesus' explanation of his kingdom intensifies as he heals, teaches, and confronts the absolute monster of unbelief. And in all of this, his followers are seeing his works, hearing his words, and responding in great faith, like Peter, or destructive unbelief, like Judas. He begins their journey asking them to follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. As the process unfolds, he deepens their understanding and gets more specific about what he wants. A disciple is not above his teacher, nor a servant above his master. This is the goal of a Christ follower and the key to a satisfied mind. While humanity is consumed with fame, recognition, security, comfort, and personal success, the King's kingdom presents another way. To become like our master is the ultimate success. So king first, then kingdom, then church is not about the kingdom first, it's about the king. It's about being known by our king and being unlocked by our king to be everything that we were made to be. Jesus talks about this a little bit, and this is probably not a little bit, it's like one of the cores that you're going to find in the God story, and you'll find it in the book of Matthew. He says, if anyone wishes to come after me, so if you want to follow me, you're going to have to set yourself aside. You're going to have to deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. So obviously he's telling us that our life is going to look like his life looked, and that's loaded. There's a lot to it. For whoever wishes to save his life is going to lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? Kind of chilling, isn't it? It gets right down to the core of how Jesus looked at life and what he was teaching us about the kingdom. And as the kingdom unfolds in the book of Matthew, that's kind of a pivot point that we just looked at, but he's explaining what this looks like. He's explaining it through his miracles and through his teachings and through his friendships and his interactions with religious leaders and world leaders and all the different things that he experienced in his earthly 3 or 4 year ministry. This leads me to something that I think is important to understand because you've heard me talk about religion, and people could perceive me as anti-religion, and I am. But it's only in the sense that religion obscures rather than unlocks. And religion takes forefront in history basically for 3 reasons. And you can really apply this to any any religion in lots of different shapes and forms. But number one, there is truth at the core of most religions. Some kind of truth exists there. That's what makes it desirable for people in their search for a satisfied mind. Number two, it's in the nature of humans to subject ourselves for various reasons. There's something about us, it must have something to do with what happened in the garden. We have left being subjected to God, and we want to be subjected to things that we can see, which often includes leaders and whether they would be political or ideologies or whatever it might be. Religion takes forefront in history because of that, because it's in the DNA of people to want to do that, the spiritual DNA. Number three, religion takes forefront in history for the third reason, there's opportunism everywhere. So whatever you're looking at, whether it's politics or religion or just any part of life, you're going to observe history, modern or past, and you're going to see opportunism. And what that means is that religion becomes a carrier. So there may be lots of different ways of looking at religion. In fact, I probably would put a lot of things under the category of religion, including atheism, that some people would think I'm crazy doing. But when you look at the nature of the belief systems that we're embracing around us today and have historically, you can see that this is true, that religion does take forefront in history because of these reasons. So, when I ask myself the question, what is true success? Several things come to mind. First of all, if we can separate Jesus from religion, we have a hope of finding our way. If we can't, it's going to be muddled and it's going to be hard to see. That's why king first, then kingdom, then church. Now, Jesus, on the religious leaders, if you were going to summarize it, you could say it this way: do as they say and not as they do. And that's part of what I spent some time talking about in this book, Kingdom, Finding Our True Self, because this was woven all the way through what Jesus was experiencing. And not only was he saying, don't do as they do, but do as they say, he was saying, look beyond to the core of what is being expressed, and that's why he taught us in parables. And I made a list on page 65. Maybe you'll recognize some of these, but basically many kingdom parables were given to us within the scope of the book of Matthew. Each one gives us multiple insights into what it means to be a son or daughter of the kingdom. And the parables are like stories that unlock. And the reason they're timeless is you can take them and unlock them at any time in history, and they work because of the nature of a parable. So you have the parable of the sower, the wheat and the weeds, the mustard seed, the leaven, the hidden treasure. All of these you can find, particularly in the book of Matthew, but in the other Gospels as well. The net, the lost sheep, the little ones, the children, the king and his servants, the landowner, the wedding feast, the 10 virgins, the talents, and the fig tree. It was important to Jesus to leave mankind these keys to be able to spiritually unlock the meaning of the kingdom. So what does that say? Well, I would think for you and for me that we would want to spend some time looking at those kingdom parables to try to understand what true success looks like. And I found a lot of liberation in that. I take each one of those and I'm able to see God in the midst of those parables, and I'm able to see God in those parables in my life through living a kingdom life. So all of that to lay a foundation to say, what is true success? And I think true success in my mind, from everything I can read, from the God story, from everything I've learned through assimilating philosophy and accepting and rejecting philosophy, and everything I've also learned through science and through the natural world, is that true success comes from our God connection. That's what the kingdom is all about. If we are connected with God, we are succeeding in the purpose that God has for it. Second of all, people connection. There's a reason that Jesus said, these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as you love yourself. On these two commandments hang all of the law and the prophets. And so God connection, people connection, but also then finding true meaning, which is all a part of this whole idea of a satisfied mind, which is what I'm trying to develop a little bit in this get-together today. There are three kind of central success stories that Jesus teaches, and they're reflective of, on page 107 of this book, and I'm only saying the pages because it helps me find them. You may end up reading this or not. That's obviously totally up to you. I think it does have some good things in it that help discover the kingdom. But there are three major teachings that Jesus did. One is about salt. He said, "You are the salt of the earth. If you've lost your savor or your flavor, what good? What good is it? You can't preserve anything if you have lost your ability to preserve." So that whole idea of purpose is part of what finding true success is all about. Second of all, there's the idea of light. You are the light of the world. So you've got salt being the purpose, light is the power. Because light has come into the world and has impacted people's souls, mankind's souls. And so we find ourselves in a position where we can walk in the light as He Himself is in the light. We can experience light all the way to the core of our souls. And the third image, and it comes out of John chapter 10, is the door. I am the door of the sheep. And it talks about access. So you've got salt being the purpose and light being the power. Well, the door is the access. And that's really a lot of what I'm trying to get at here about in kingdom, finding your true self. And right along with that then is everything is about the heart, right? We experience heart things from God, and when we leave this world, it's all going to be about heart. It's all going to be about connection. Now, along with that, there's a topic that is important to consider. We don't do what we do because of what we can get from God, but there is the idea of rewards for a life well lived. Now, the unique thing about these rewards is we're not going to walk up to the throne and be handed our rewards and then go sit in a rewarded place. We're going to take the rewards that we have brought with us, and we are going to present them to the King who made us. And that's what's being talked about here of a life well lived. Because Jesus is going to return a second time, and because until then He has asked us to sacrifice and submit ourselves to His kingship over our personal wills and desires, it seems encouraging to consider the reward of making such a decision for us to bend our knee. And this is why humility is such a huge part of the key to the kingdom and of finding our true selves. Now, before we get all excited about what we're going to get from God because we have chosen His kingship, let's take a look at the concept of crowns that is woven through the scriptures. And this part is important because you want to be able to see some of the ultimate destination now, because it is very motivating to know that we are going to share in the reward of Christ. So that's a thought that you might want to consider and develop more fully as you either look it up in a copy of the God Story or look it up in this book if you choose to get it, which you can find it at Fourthstream.com very easily. I mentioned at the beginning of our time together some success challenges, and I talked about success challenge number 3, and that was just what kinds of things that we can do to set ourselves up for finding our true selves. I'd like to read a little bit about that here. Invite the spiritual process of interacting personally with Jesus' teaching about His kingship and His kingdom. Once you have determined whether or not Jesus is the king over the entire earth, your end game becomes much more clear. If He is the king, it has implications. Now, if this is a stretch for you, ask your Creator to meet you on this road to personal connection. Now, I got to admit, some people are lazy. There's always tomorrow, right? Some of us are content to be ignorant. If I'm unaware, then I fancy myself to be off the hook. If I didn't know about it, well, then it doesn't matter, right? Some of us are great at making excuses, and we have our litany of reasons and philosophies that bring false comfort to the part of us that is our God-shaped whole. And some people choose self-gratification to the point of being absorbed by self. And some choose relativism as a cop-out. How can someone really know anything? After all, no one God has distinguished himself as worthy to be my God, right? I don't think that's true. The kingdom heart is courageous. It's hungry to investigate, to learn, and to experience the God who has revealed himself to us through the macro and the micro of nature, and in science and philosophy, and through specific revelation and supernatural intervention. So, integrating this into the other conversations that we've been having. So, back to your take on your true self and kind of where we started a number of weeks ago and continue to weave in here. When it comes to science and knowledge, what do we learn from science and knowledge about where we are headed? I would say a lot. We are headed in the direction of meeting a creator who is intelligent beyond our wildest dreams, down into the minutest detail of the cell, all the way up to the amazing galaxies that are spread all through the endless, at least this point, all we can tell, endless eternity. And so we learn a lot from science and knowledge about where we're headed. And that helps my true self. Second thing, philosophy and thought. When I engage in thinking, like I was just talking about, not being lazy, but being engaged and being courageous, that serves me because I'm not just paying attention to the part of me that wants to be entertained, I'm looking at the part of me that is hungry to grow. And that relates also to faith and your heart. In what ways has your heart been unlocked by faith? Which, religion does some of this. Kingdom experience with Jesus does more of this. So that whole idea of faith unlocking your heart is just a huge gift and a huge blessing when it comes to finding your true self. Where that leaves me, and I call this the circle, because as I've looked at Matthew and what Matthew had to say about the kingdom, and as I've investigated it, I've concluded that the essence of what Jesus was teaching can be found in these four principles. First of all, a pure heart. God wants us, and we're going to talk about this more down the road a little bit, but I want to overview it a little bit at the beginning here. God wants us to have a pure heart because the pure in heart can see God, according to Matthew chapter 5. And I want to know what that means, right? I want to know what a pure heart is. Does that mean being a good person, or is that me being a humble person? I've concluded in studying this and observing this that a pure heart is a humbled heart. That then opens up the door to knowing God. And so if you don't have humility, it's very difficult to know God. You can see this in the scriptures, you can see it in philosophy, you can see this in history. So humility or a pure heart opens the door to knowing God, and knowing God then allows us to do real kindness. And I'm not talking about being a do-gooder. I'm talking about actually doing God's kindness to the people around me. And that in turn then engages me in growing real life. And that's why I call it the circle. And that dumps me back up into being humbled before the mighty hand of God, knowing God, doing kindness, and growing life. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as things unfold. The kingdom, very key to who we are, very key to where we're going. Take church and take religion, and just in your mind, set up next to it kingdom. And if you don't know a lot about the kingdom, then you might want to check it out, because Jesus had a lot to say about it. In fact, way more than he had to say about church. And anything he had to say about religion often was in the context of the scribes and the Pharisees, the religious leaders of Israel.
Thanks for listening to our podcast. You can find posts and podcasts on tons of subjects at fourthstream.com, along with encouraging music which can be shared by a variety of ages. Finding hope at fourthstream.com.